Hello, this is Randy. I wanted to welcome you back to Brain Break with Randy and Keitho and tell you a story from when I was younger. I was ordained a high priest in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a fairly young man. I put it off as long as I could get away with not being ordained a high priest because I felt like I was a young guy. I had been ordained to 70 at a young age, and then they did away with 70s, and so they were supposed to ordain me a high priest, and I kind of fought that. Anyway, my stake president convinced me that I should be a high priest, so I served as a high counselor for a number of years. In fact, I got called the same Sunday as we got a new bishop. And about 2.5, 3 years into his serving as a bishop, I was called by the stake president. He said, "You've been getting to know your bishop." I said, "I have." He says, "Well, why do you think that is?" I said, "I don't know. He's my neighbor, but he was in the stake when I was in the ward. He was the stake executive secretary. I just never saw him." He says, "Well, he likes you and would like me to release you as a high counselor and make you one of his counselors." I said, "Wow, I'm kind of surprised, but yeah, I'd be happy to serve with the bishop. The other thing you're going to need to do is release the ward clerk." Now, my home ward was the Mesa 3rd Ward. We had a ward clerk who was still working when I moved into the ward, and he was in his 80s, and he worked at U-Haul. He just didn't want to retire. He could have, but he didn't want to. So he rode the bus to downtown Phoenix from Mesa. He worked as an accountant for them. He did that for several years until he finally decided it was too tiring to ride the bus. He, as our ward clerk, we had a computer, but it was not used as far as he knew because he was doing everything paper. I think we were the last ward in the church sending in the tithing reports and everything on paper. Anyway, this is in probably the early 90s. And we had a very nice computer. And, so they asked me to release him. I did. It was hard for him to understand me because he was so deaf. At the time, I believe he was 92. Now, I have been my whole career, once I got out of college, all my jobs have been remote. I worked as an outside salesman, based at home. So I was home if I wasn't traveling. So one day I get a call from this man's wife. This is the same week I'm called to be in the bishopric. His wife calls me and she says, "Brother Mac, come and see me. Please, you must hurry." I said, "Well, what's the urgency? I'm kind of busy. I'm working." She says, "Joe's on the roof again." It's a 92-year-old man who's fallen off the roof before. And somehow every time someone takes his ladder away, he gets it back and he would climb up on the roof. Anyway, I go over, talk him off the roof. I do the service on his evaporative air. We have swamp coolers here in Mesa, or we used to. I don't know if many people have them anymore. But basically what it did was it would, when the humidity wasn't high, it would put water through a pad and then blow that chilled water into which would be chilling or evaporating that water through the heat, and then that would cool your home. It was much less expensive than using an air conditioner back in the day because air conditioners weren't very efficient. Now that air conditioners are much more efficient, most people don't use that system, but some still do. It can be very efficient if you do the right thing. Anyway, so I talk him off the roof. Then when I leave, even though I drove over, I walk home with this huge ladder he's got. It had to be an extension ladder, and it was probably 10 or 12 feet long, and then would double that. So when I'm carrying this home, I get it home, and I walk back to his house and get my car and drive home. And my wife is out doing something, and she comes home and says, "Why is there a ladder in our living room?" I said, "Because if I leave it in the yard, Joe will come get it." So I explained to her everything. She starts laughing. She says, well, it can't stay there. I said, yeah, I know, but I can't leave it outside because he'll come find it. So we've got to leave it in the house till I find out what I can do with it. Anyway, he was quite a character. One other story from when I was first called into the bishopric. There was a lady in the ward who, I'm not sure if she just had cataracts, but she basically was blind. And her name was Goldie. And she also couldn't hear. And so if she were to talk to you, she would talk very loudly because she couldn't hear herself. And she's the nicest lady. But anyway, when I was learning to serve and be introduced to people in the ward I didn't know, the bishop took me over and introduced me to her. And he had Parkinson's. And so he couldn't write out a check for her, but I could. So I wrote out a check for her and held the check in place so she could sign it. So as I'm sustained, she's asking what's going on to whoever she's sitting by, and she's sitting in the back row in the chapel proper. And somebody's telling her that I've got called, and she then hears my voice as I'm speaking. And then when I pause, she says, oh, that's the nice guy that writes my checks. And it didn't dawn on me till later that somebody might have thought I was writing checks for her without permission, but I wasn't. I only wrote the one check out for her. She was a character, loved her to death. But that was a great experience. The bishop I served under, been in 7 bishoprics before he was finally made a bishop. He was a former command master sergeant in the Army. He had served in, I know, Vietnam, and I'm not sure if it was Korea as well, but he had made a career of it. And then he went to work for the post office. And then he retired from the post office when his Parkinson's got really bad. But I learned an awful lot from him for my first year. Now, you got to remember, I'd been a high counselor for 4 years, and I'd been to every meeting that the stake had ever had for the Melchizedek priesthood. But he took me to every meeting that first year and made sure I understood why they held that meeting, how important it was that I go. He was a delight. Unfortunately, he passed a few years ago. I missed serving with him. It was one of the most enjoyable times of my life. I was the second counselor, and the first counselor had served in a few bishoprics. His name was Terry, and he was amazing, but his eyesight was going on him, so he couldn't read a document because his arms weren't long enough, and he didn't have readers yet, cheaters or reading glasses. And so what I used to do is I would read my document, and I'm sitting clear across the desk from him, and then I'd turn my paper towards him, and he could read it. I mean, we're talking a piece of paper that's like 6 or 7 feet away from him, and he's reading it without any glasses because that's how good his eyesight was, except he now can't focus in on something close. We had a lot of fun. Now, this was before members of the bishopric did temple recommend interviews. Certainly didn't do anything with fast offerings or food orders from the bishop's storehouse or from Deseret Industries for goods. But my bishop, due to his health, the stake president asked if I would do those things as well. I said, well, sure, but I'm just a second counselor. Why doesn't the first counselor do that? Oh, and the other thing was doing temple recommend interviews. And they said, well, he's not comfortable doing it. And so we'd like you to do it. We could do that. So it was really a big change from being a traveling salesman and then being gone and coming back and, being a scouting leader to adults, and then having the experience of doing all these things, helping people find jobs, but taking care of them when there was a need and a necessity. That was a big growing time for myself and my family. And I'm grateful that that good bishop had faith in me and that I could help him. It's a real blessing. It's interesting that the man who I replaced was probably one of the most supportive people I've ever met for me in that calling. He was always asking if there's anything he could do to make my life easier. This is a guy who had 2 kids and a wife. He had a very busy job, but he was always asking me what he could do to assist me and to make my life easier. And I thought that was just amazing because, if anything, he could have been a little frustrated that he got released or somebody that, was a little more targeted. That really helped me understand a lot about leadership and looking out for people who you have an opportunity of serving with. So that's the only story I wanted to tell you tonight. And I hope you have a great evening. I hope you enjoy this. Please, if you would, tell your friends about Brain Break with Randy and Keitho. If you can, like and subscribe. It's been wonderful. Take care and have a wonderful night. Bye now.